Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to give people just a couple minutes here to join before we get started. Hello, and welcome to Tevora's webinar, Automated Identity Management, Making Identity Access Management Painless. My name is Jay Sheen from Tevora's Account Management team. A little bit about Tevora. Tevora has been doing consulting work in the information security, risk, and compliance space for over 16 years. We have over 100 consultants on staff that specialize in enterprise risk assessments, threat management, incident response, data privacy, cloud security, solutions advisory, and implementation, point-in-time security compliance frameworks, including ISO, SOC, PCI, HIPAA, and HITRUST. Today, we're pleased to hear from Ben Dimmick, Manager of Identity Solutions here at Tevora. If there are any questions, please use the chat function in GoToMeeting. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. With that said, Ben, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Jay. So one of the reasons we wanted to address this is because we find that so many of our clients have undertaken identity projects in the past, and they've just run into a lot of challenges. It seemed like it was necessary to focus on some of the benefits around identity projects. And really, even up until probably the last 5 years or so, it was probably more the norm than the exception for identity projects to be on the painful side. But there's really a lot of benefits that come out of it. So in order to kind of get a feel for what the process for automating identity should look like, I wanted to first kind of dive into what the current state of most organizations is before they start to undertake this type of approach to things. One of the things we start to notice pretty quickly early on is that most of the processes traditionally tend to be request-driven. They tend to start with somebody making a request of someone else, whether it's that I need to get a new user added in or something else along those lines. But it's all around someone asking for something, and so it seems like without some automation in place, so much of this is just an endless process of chasing down requests and tickets and trying to get them fulfilled along the way. Another thing that we notice pretty often is that there tends to be a lack of standards in place. There's not usually a standardized approach to lots of things, And so a lot of these processes are people just kind of figuring it out as they go along. This, of course, means that we end up with some very interesting processes along the way. And it also means that we're usually functioning in much more of an ad hoc approach to things. So the way that one individual addresses a request may be different than the way another individual addresses a request, such as if someone asks for access to an application or a system, one person may end up giving them administrator rights to that, and the other person may end up giving just basic rights to it. So it creates a lot of challenges here as there's inconsistencies. Obviously, with these ad hoc processes, we end up with a lot of things going undocumented. So things are really difficult to understand exactly how things have been implemented in the past and why that was the case. And then finally, we notice a strong trend around a lack of centralized management. So trying to find out who has access to different types of systems becomes a massive undertaking overall. This introduces a lot of problems that are even separate from these current states. One of those problems is that managing identities simply takes a lot of time and effort. I read one study that said that it takes an average of 20 hours for organizations to onboard users when they first started at a company, and that's man hours at the help desk, your IT department, and so on and so forth. Tends to be fairly expensive labor, and it tends to be a fairly hefty undertaking that is going on a daily basis. One of the other issues we see a lot of inaccuracy. For instance, again, with those inconsistent approaches to things, we end up with botched records. We end up with folks getting access to things they shouldn't generally have access to or need, and so we end up with a lot of issues in that respect too. This also makes it virtually impossible to really do user audits and attestations, finding out who has access to what components, verifying what that looks like. This tends to be a manual and tedious process that is difficult to undertake on a consistent basis. Also, we see a huge lack of oversight around these processes. For instance, when you're sitting in a situation where it's difficult to know exactly what all of your applications are and who has access to it, obviously very difficult to figure out how they've been implemented and if that's been done in a safe and secure manner and so on. So wanted to dive in next around some of the components that make up a successful identity automation program. One of the first ones that we really need to have is some type of IAM platform. We need to have something in place that's going to act as our hub for functioning all the different use cases that we have in place. Some of the ones we see most often are Okta and SailPoint. There's lots of other players in the space that are filling similar roles. OneLogin, Savient, Microsoft with their Azure platform it has a lot of redundancy with some of these features as well. But one thing I do kind of want to warn folks about is, in a lot of cases, it's not just a matter of having one single solution to cover all of your use cases. In a lot of cases, we need to have more than one, because there's very few identity providers out there that are really trying to tackle the entire stack all at once, because simply put, there's just so many different things that need to be done well. It's hard to be able to do all of them well along the way. So to kind of cover some of those components real quickly here, SSO and access management. This tends to be a fairly direct one around getting access put into place properly. For instance, how do we ensure that we're controlling access? Well, SSO is a fairly direct way to do it, and generally a fairly popular one as well. Another major component there is the governance side of things. Going through and being able to do your user attestations, your user audits, reviewing all of the access that's in place. This is another component that we see coming in pretty heavily. That's really important for successful organizations on the identity front. Another one, multi-factor authentication. Once we have a solid control on our access management, ensuring that we have strong authentication is another important component to getting into the right position. And finally, what we're getting at here is lifecycle management. So this is really what we wanted to cover mostly with this webinar, is the lifecycle management process. How are users going from being not a user in the organization to becoming a user in the organization, getting all the right access, and then ultimately having that access revoked when it's no longer necessary for them. So one of the other components, once we have our identity platform into place, that tends to play a fairly crucial role for us is our HRIS. And you're probably familiar with a lot of the names on here, ServiceNow, Workday, Bamboo HR, namely, just a few of the ones that show up, and there's a very long list of systems that are out there. You may also see this referred to as an HRMS, so Human Resources Information System or Human Resources Management System. Most organizations have these days. This takes a lot of different forms. Maybe you even have ADP or something else along those lines. But most HR systems now have some type of system like this for onboarding. And this is usually an important component for us in our identity platform and automation. I'll be coming back around to that in just a minute. Then we have to worry about all the other components that we're interfacing with along the way. So cloud apps, generally a pretty crucial component to our identity program. Our on-prem servers, we can't seem to get away from those quite yet, but those exist for most organizations still. It's also something to consider along the way. Active Directory, again, something that most organizations have still, even though it's a lot of organizations now don't. That's still something to keep in mind because it's been our traditional identity source for a long time. Of course, we need to worry about how we're managing our users, what our management team looks like overall. So this is our company leadership. And then finally, there's our IT group we have to worry about. So again, traditionally, what would happen is that our HR team would have a new hire they're bringing in. They would contact IT. IT would then connect up to all of these different systems, provision the users for what's been requested, and away they go. In a lot of cases as well, IT would have to reach out to the manager of the person who's starting, find out what their access is supposed to look like. They would rely on managers, supervisors, and so on and so forth to ensure that they know what the proper access looks like. And if they don't, or there's mistakes, then either our users have too much access or too little. Too much access, probably that never gets reported, in which case we just have a vulnerability there. Too little access, well, that means we're opening another ticket later on and we're investing more man hours into resolving this same problem that came up previously. So wanted to dive in next around some of the lessons that we've learned by doing identity automation over the last few years at Tevora. There's been a lot of important things we've learned that we wanted to pass on to the group here. The first one I wanted to touch on is that you really need to establish a system of record. And by this, we mean, what do you ultimately trust to have the details about your users? One of the things we're seeing that tends to be most successful is to begin using your HRIS. That's one of the reasons why we have it on here. When users first start at a company, this is usually the first place that their details have been added into and where we can use to begin propagating our other systems. This will already contain information around, for instance, what their role is, which department they're in, what their name is, and so on and so forth. The HRIS generally will feed into our identity platform. The goal here is that we want to have some type of way to get the details out of our HRIS and begin propagating them to other systems, which is, of course, our next step. As we pull those details into our identity access management platform, we then push them onto other systems. Active Directory tends to be a downstream system from our HRIS or from our identity platform. Some organizations, they'll do it where their HRIS feeds directly into Active Directory and then into our identity platform, and that's fine as well. There's several different ways for getting this done. This tends to be what we find is the most direct, though, is that the identity platform becomes the centralized hub for getting users provisioned into their applications and ensuring that access is direct in that respect. So another important thing that we're finding too is that we can't always keep every single thing directly downstream from our HRIS. And by this, I mean that, for instance, there's generally some types of information that we need on users that HR isn't necessarily going to have within the HRIS. For instance, what extension is the user going to have, which laptop are they going to be assigned, things like that. So planning processes around how you're going to enrich some of that data along the way is another important consideration. So again, as with before, we're starting out with in our HRIS. We're then beginning to use this information to enrich things along the way. We're ultimately pulling the information that we need. Sometimes we're getting it from users, sometimes it's from management. Other times it's coming from IT, for instance. But ultimately, there's a request coming in for whatever needs to occur once we've gotten our HRIS data in. This is generally forwarded over to our IT staff. For instance, Bill needs a new extension. Bill needs a new laptop. So-and-so is moving desks. This type of information, you generate your request. It's then forwarded over to IT. IT goes and responds to the service request, gets the necessary changes implemented, and then updates our IAM platform so that we have the correct data there for future calls of that information. One component that's not demonstrated in here, but something to keep in mind, is the ticketing system, or CMDB, for keeping track of all the various assets within the organization as they're managed. That's something that generally interfaces with the IAM platform, either in a downstream or an upstream capacity, or in both in some cases. So perhaps, for instance, someone logs into the IAM platform, they put in a request to change their desk, for instance. That then generates a ticket in your ticketing system, and the ticketing system then contacts the IAM system once you've finished the request, in order to close the loop out and make sure that the whole process is updated overall. As that request is completed, the identity platform is then able to go out and make the subsequent changes in your other systems to ensure that everything is kept up to date and accurate in that respect. So planning around how you're going to handle some of those exceptions for some of those systems that can't be fully automated is another important component that we're seeing to this. Lesson number 3, look real closely at birthright entitlements. And by this, what we mean is your job becomes substantially simpler when you begin the process by understanding exactly what everyone is going to need on day one. This is really where, for instance, we cut out that 20-hour commitment per user, is by understanding all of this. So, for instance, we have George starting in sales. He's going to need access to Salesforce. Everybody needs access to Office 365, so on and so forth. Knowing what type of entitlements users need at the very beginning gives you a huge leg up around automating these particular processes. And this generally is going to, again, start from our HR system. We're going to start in HRIS. We're going to create different entitlements based around whether it's role, department, the office they work out of. There's lots of different components that we can use to figure out exactly what users are going to need access to initially, and that helps us then to automate our processes from there. That way, instead of giving users access to everything, we're able to just give them access to the specific applications that they need along the way in order for them to be enabled to do their jobs. Number 4, self-service. So part of the goal here as well is that even with these initial birthright entitlements in place, you're going to run across exceptions along the way. You're going to run across people who they need everything that everybody in sales usually has, plus they need 1 or 2 extra things, that sort of thing along the way. Adding in self-service helps to drive that process substantially more smoothly as well. And generally, the way that we will work that, how we'll get that implemented, is those requests will originate with users. We'll enable our users to connect to the identity platform and put in requests for the resources, applications, and so on and so forth that they need from their end. That will allow them to really drive this themselves and not have to add in a lot of extra steps. Where we head from there, usually we're sending off a request to that person's manager, or someone else, a supervisor. Maybe in some cases, we're sending this off to the owner of the application that they're asking access for. So someone in the organization is going to review that access, ensure that it looks correct, and then send back an approval or a denial to our identity platform. That then continues the workflow from there. From there, we're sending that request off to IT if it's necessary for them to get engaged. Otherwise, we're simply just jumping into the automated processes ourselves, directly getting users access to those applications if the workflow is something that's capable of full automation. So we're really able to reduce the amount of time it takes for users to get access to resources. In a lot of organizations, the initial onboarding time is very long. Usually I've talked to a lot of organizations where their initial onboarding time is up to a week just to get people access to everything they need. With a self-service system where we have automated provisioning into the applications, for instance, the user requests access, their manager approves it right then, and they have access within just a couple of minutes. So you're able to reduce the lag time for getting users up to speed and ready to work by a substantial amount as well. That doesn't even factor into the initial 20 hours of onboarding that I had mentioned previously. This would be in excess of that. Number 5 I wanted to cover is something that tends to be associated to a lot of identity projects, and that's make sure as you're approaching this that this isn't a narrow approach that one department is doing. And by that I mean that there's very few identity initiatives that we've seen be successful when one department is trying to do it all by themselves, such as security or IT or what have you, saying that we're going to implement the system all by ourselves. In the various use cases we've discussed here, we've mentioned how, for instance, our HRIS has to be a component of that. That means we need to get HR involved. We also need to get HR involved to make sure that our initial onboarding processes are accurate and consistent with the way that we practice things in the past, and that they're going to meet our objectives in the future. We need to get the various departments engaged because, for instance, they'll need to be the ones approving applications as users request access to various things. Because if they're failing to do that, then you are back to having to go back to manual processes again. And people are opening up tickets with the help desk and so on and so forth throughout the whole process. So a lot here that requires getting everybody in the organization involved. Another thing that's pretty crucial about this is ensuring that your applications going forward are following a similar process really a consistent process for getting them onboarded. The part of the issue with a lot of the cloud applications that have sprung up is that they've led to a lot of siloization. So, for instance, a lot of organizations don't even know all of the cloud applications that are in use. They don't have good ways to discover them. With this approach, it tends to work best if you can get away from that and begin actually keeping a formalized list of all the cloud applications that are out there and how they're being governed and managed and so on and so forth. So that's definitely part of this as well, is implementing a process whereby everybody in the organization now will start following similar processes. What this usually looks like is, again, we're starting out our applications. In this case, we're starting them out with users. As users want to gravitate towards applications, they're reporting those applications to management, making sure that management is aware of those applications, making sure that they're approved applications, and we can begin using them and pulling them into the fold. Management then passes those applications along to IT, ensure that IT is on board with the overall processes, that IT is able to ensure that the applications are properly managed, following company policy and procedure and so on. And then, of course, IT is getting those applications onboarded into the IAM platform so that subsequent provisioning functions can be automated, as well as access is secured and controlled going forward. So 5 lessons that we've seen so far when we're doing identity automation that have been pretty crucial to success overall. And hopefully these have been helpful for you. With that in mind, let me go ahead and flip this over and see if anybody has any questions we can go ahead and address.
Yes, Ben. We had a couple come in, actually. We had a couple questions come in. Sorry, that was in the distance there. But so the first question, what's the best way to get started with identity automation?
Yeah, so one of the best ways, or I guess I'd say one of the first steps, is really getting an inventory of all the applications that are out there. It's very difficult to plan around the process for protecting identities if we don't even know what the applications are that we're starting out with initially. So that's generally one of the first steps from there. If you have a pretty good handle on that, and I will say, frankly speaking, in my experience, less than 5% of the organizations that I have worked with have been able to say confidently that they know all of the applications and web applications that are being used by their organization. So looking for ways to discover those and begin getting them brought into the fold, so to speak, so that they can be ultimately managed is a pretty crucial first step. If you have that, I would say, and you have an identity platform, I'd say your next step is really to begin figuring out what your birthright entitlements look like. What applications does everybody in a specific department need? What type of exceptions are in place, and so on and so forth. So that's generally some of the first steps that we're recommending for most organizations.
Excellent. We do have another question as well. Who usually owns the identity processes once automation is implemented?
Oh yeah, and this one can be a little bit of a challenge because it's not as straightforward as a lot of other things are. So for instance, you put in a SIM or something, then it's going to be owned by security or IT or somebody, whoever put it in usually. With identity, it just as how it needs to be a group effort, ownership needs to be a group effort in some respects. So for instance, there's the HR components that have to be owned by HR. There's the MFA components that might be owned by security, and so on and so forth. So usually the way it works is that everybody owns some component of it overall, and then there is a group that is that's assigned to own the whole process overall and ensure that the process is effective. The other thing as well is that in order to really have a successful system, you have to have a strong management support system in place. So you have to have a decent amount of support from your management team to ensure that the processes are being executed and supported along the way. I would say that the security team frequently takes a large portion of ownership, as well as the IT team. But we really have to look at everybody overall in terms of ensuring that processes are being followed along the way. So hopefully that answers the question there.
Yes, and I don't have any follow-up questions on that, so I think we're good with the questions.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. We're going to keep this fairly brief. If anybody has any other questions they want to discuss offline, my contact details are there on the slide right now. I'm happy to address this as well as anything else that might have come up offline. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day, folks.